Welcome to Thayer Public Library's Mocktails with Local Authors. I'm Christina Castle. I'm our circulation librarian here, and tonight's book talk host. Tonight's mocktail is the Candy Apple, so please help yourself to refreshments anytime during the program. Thank you to the sci-fi, fantasy, and horror authors on our panel. In not order, we have Nick Bythrow, we have Carla E. Dash, and we have Jennifer Safri. I'll be introducing them more in detail as we go along. The audience will have a chance to ask questions after each author speaks, and another chance to ask questions of the whole panel once all authors have spoken. You may also talk to the authors afterwards when we've broken out into the signing and book selling section of the program. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special thank you to BCAM TV, who funded and installed the microphones, and as well as being here to film us this evening. Nick Bythrow is a speculative fiction author whose work spans a wide variety of genres with a focus on horror and thriller titles. He graduated from Hampshire College in Amherst, Mass. With a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication, Journalism, and Media Studies. Nick has had a passion for writing all his life, penning his first manuscript, his supernatural horror story, These Stone Walls, at 15. Nick is the lead writer for TV news at the entertainment news site Screen Rant and project manager for global research initiative Security in Context. He's since published 7 books, including his 2021 horror novel Echo Paradise. He's currently working on his next horror novel, thank you, Jen, titled In the Back Closet. Please welcome Nick, author of Echo Paradise.
Hello. Thank you, Christina, for putting this wonderful panel together. So, Echo Paradise is the third novel that I've written, or the third book that I've written. And as Christina mentioned, I started writing at 15. I was inspired by the works of Stephen King and Dean Koontz to create these sort of supernatural horror stories. And Echo Paradise is my latest. So I would like to read the back of the book to summarize what it's about. Deservation. Leisha Winters has repeated this fabricated word in her head for the better part of a year. After a tragic accident, she has succumbed to her blame, content to put the horrible event out of her mind by staying distracted at her computer. One night, she sneaks downstairs to get a snack, only to discover the world changing around her. Objects long gone are reappearing in her home. Gaping black maws to an unknown void hunt her in the dark, everything trying to drag her into remembering a past she yearns to forget. Soon, however, Leisha realizes the memories of last spring will not stop haunting her until she confronts them. Awakening from the nightmare of her reality, she discovers an inverted world of blue trees, red leaves, and a purple sun high in the sky. While this new world attempts to force her into facing what's happened, she struggles against its pull as much as she can. Only the echo in the forest appears to understand what she truly wants: deservation. Echo Paradise is a supernatural story about grief, tragedy, and how we confront the demons they leave us with. So throughout Echo Paradise, the protagonist, Leisha Winters, goes on a sort of supernatural and cerebral journey because she lost somebody close to her in her family. And she has this sort of, because of the events surrounding what happened to this person, she has a lot of survivor's guilt and a lot of thoughts of what could have been different and things of that nature. So a lot of Echo Paradise came from a very personal place. In 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I lost my grandfather, who was my best friend. And so I was very depressed and angry, and it had been a hard year up to that point anyway. And so Echo Paradise was really an exercise in taking that grief and those complex feelings and just putting them on paper in really the only way I knew how, which was with a supernatural horror story. And so a lot of the, I'd say a number of feelings that Leisha has are conjured up for the story itself, because the circumstances surrounding the person that she loses are vastly different from what, my reality is. But a lot of them also sort of reflect what I was feeling at the time, this sort of grief and rage and self-blame to an extent, even though, feelings like that aren't always realistic to have. But anyway, while I was writing Echo Paradise, in the middle of the editing process, I lost my other grandfather, and so that influenced a lot of the way that the story evolved into what it became on paper a month later when it was released. So yeah, a lot of Echo Paradise was really kind of a, I don't know any other way to say it other than it was kind of a selfish exercise in trying to get those feelings from my brain onto anything, really. And yeah, that was what I did. Now I'll say, in terms of content, Echo Paradise leans into a lot of sort of surrealist, supernatural ideas. I pulled a lot from, Stephen King and Dean Koontz were sort of my writing heroes, I guess, as you could say, my biggest inspirations. But as somebody who works in TV media and things like that, a lot of the inspiration for my writing on the page is also influenced by other mediums. And so I think one of my biggest influences for this book and for a lot of other work that I do in supernatural horror is Mike Flanagan, a horror director. He's best known for TV shows like The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass on Netflix, and just kind of leaning into that multimedia sort of lens when writing. And it extends beyond Echo Paradise too. I have These Stone Walls, my other horror novel, The Tree Dream, which is a paranormal romance novella, and A Glass Coffin, which is a revenge thriller, all pulling from various sources. But Echo Paradise does remain one of my most personal works because of where a lot of the inspiration for it comes from. And yeah, that's...
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
We were talking before the audience arrived about you self-published.
Yes.
So what does that process look like for you, from writing all the way up until a book is ready to have readers?
Yeah, so self-publishing is much different than, like a traditional publishing, because you have to do all of the work. You have to do, the cover, you have to write the back of the book, you got to make sure that it looks halfway decent so people will buy it. So, this cover, I, took a photo and edited it, and the self-publishing process, what I did was I used Kindle Direct Publishing, which is a free-to-use program from Amazon. And so you plop your book in there as I usually use PDF or doc or whatever file type you want, and I won't get too technical. And you can just have the book on sale on Amazon pretty much right away. And the real trick to self-publishing is trying to get people to buy the book. So you really have to push the advertisements and find some way to build up an audience for the book. So I used a lot of Facebook marketing and things like that, and it helps that even though it came out in 2021, I still get a lot of sales for it more recently because of my work at Screen Rant, because there's that sort of connection there, and of just like having a larger audience to push things for through social media and things like that. And yeah, that's pretty much what it's like. And
Now you said you're working on another book.
I am working on another
You have an
book.
audience in
Yes.
front of you. Do you want to tell them about
Yeah,
your new
so
book?
I'm working on a horror fantasy novel called In the Back Closet. And I do have a summary, a rough summary for the book with me today.
So I avoid my backlog.
All right, we'll see. We'll see. So, in the back closet, Henry Price has built a lucrative following online with his serialized fantasy stories. But that veil of security lifts when the closet in his new apartment starts to move around his room. After getting trapped inside, he discovers a world beyond filled with the familiar and the fantastical. Searching for a way out, he's ambushed by a group of malevolent creatures, vague ideas he created and abandoned as a child. They reveal to him the stories he's been writing are mirrors into other realities, realities he has the power to bend to his will. Threatening what he loves the most, they demand to become real in his world.
Take my money.
And right now, it doesn't have a release date. Ideally, because I like to overshoot, I would love to get it out by February, but more realistically, April or May of next year. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to turn it over to audience questions. If anyone has a Nick-specific question. Ooh, there's two that do. Go ahead, Sam.
Did anything directly inspire the made-up word of deservation, or did we just struck with it?
Yes, what was the inspiration behind the word deservation? So a lot of that came from the words deserve and desecration, sort of a combination of the two, because Alicia believes that she deserves to be punished for not protecting the person that she cared about, because in the book, it's sort of slowly unraveled that she could have stopped what happened, and she feels like she deserves to be punished for it, and that is sort of the premise of her journey.
So I have a question, and my question to you is, I noticed that your protagonist is female, so I was wondering, was there, and what was behind that choice?
Honestly, nothing major. I just kind of envisioned the story as having a female protagonist. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Alicia Winters just kind of popped into my head, and I was like, okay, she exists now.
I read your book last year, and it's good to see that you are safe.
It is good that I am sane, yeah.
You have the appearance, so it seems like it was.
I'm doing a good job at making it seem like that. Yeah.
When I was reading it, I did get a little worried.
No need to worry. No need to worry. You're not the first person to tell me that, don't worry.
Nick has a dark side, and then he has a darker side.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
I just was wondering, do you ever cry or get scared reading your role?
Do I ever cry do I ever cry or get scared reading my own words? Not particularly, no. Not usually.
Well, that's not surprising.
Yeah. Not usually. Not usually. I'll leave it at that.
If you think of any questions along the way, there will be more time at the end to ask questions. We're going to turn our attentions now to Carla. Carla E. Dash is a local author who writes short stories about personifications of death, as well as other weird stuff like characters trapped inside video games, vengeful children, and the annihilation of the universe. Carla E. Dash lives in Braintree, Mass. With her husband, children, and cats. She teaches middle schoolers, procrastinates via video games and anime, and occasionally buckles down and writes. Her writing has appeared in the Kenyon Review Online, Cosmorama, Eucalyptus Lit, and elsewhere. Her debut story collection, Monsters and Other Tales of Humanity, is out now from Meerkat Press. You can visit her at carlae-.com or follow at carlae- on Instagram for updates. Please welcome Carla, author of Monsters and Other Tales of Humanity.
Thank you. I'm going to take a note out of Nick's book and just read the back of the book because I feel like that'll give a good sort of overview of what this is about. So it is a collection of short stories. It has been classified various ways: horror, dark fantasy. It's been given genre labels, and I really hate genre labels, so I don't know what I would classify it as, but I'll read the back to you and you can decide. Revealing both how terrifying and how heroic individuals can be when untethered from relationships, Monsters and Other Tales of Humanity portrays the ways people cope with loneliness. A woman is haunted by death who progressively resembles her drowned fiancé. A child seeks beauty in a handsome stranger's greenhouse and holds out hope for a savior. A woman's husband is murdered by police and her monstrous children enact a bloody revenge. A negligent mail carrier believes stars are disappearing from the sky, heralding the annihilation of the universe. A video game character's dissonance with the actions he must perform precipitates a choice that could destroy his world. Speculative and lyrical, these stories explore the human need for connection and how the lack of ties warps lives. So I'm thinking I will read a little bit of the very first story of the collection, which is the woman haunted by death who progressively resembles her drowned fiancé story. It is called A Puzzle by the Name of L, and I will try to hold a microphone and hold a book and read all at the same time. And then I'll talk a little bit about the story and how it came to be and what were some inspirations and stuff like that. A Puzzle by the Name of L. When death knocks on Stephanie's door, she is wallowing in the after effects of her fiancé's death, trekking aimlessly through the boggy muck that was once her heart, her life, and wondering if this year, finally, will be the one that drains away what's left of her will to live. Also, she is working on a jigsaw puzzle. The interruption annoys her because even though most of the cardboard pieces are lying in dark, senseless piles, the blue-black of the river has just started to distinguish itself from the blue-gray mist hovering above it. This is important, she knows, the turning point of the whole activity, the first step towards completion. Stephanie is something of an authority on jigsaw puzzles. She has been doing a lot of them in the 2 years since Hayden died. Looking through the peephole, she knows the guy standing on her threshold is Death because he's wearing a billowing black robe and swinging a scythe back and forth at his side in short, fluid pendulum arcs. Also, there is something about his looks, something ashen, unfinished, something not quite existent. She thinks, I should be afraid. She stands perfectly still, unbreathing, waiting for the emotion to flood through her veins, but she feels nothing, so she opens the door. Boo, says Death. His voice is grainy, a new or seldom used thing, but with a deep, languorous current running beneath it. It is a voice with potential, Stephanie thinks, the kind of voice that could sing arias, seduce in seconds, if only he'd give a little cough or clear his throat. You aren't a ghost, she replies. I'm not, he asks, all innocence. Stephanie slides her eyes down the length of his body once, slowly, just to be sure. Black robe, still billowing. Scythe, still swinging. She notices as well that his chest is quite broad, but that his fingers are long and thin. Obviously, she says. Good to know. Then he smiles, straight and bone white, but fetching, charming, like a guy who just a moment ago scored the winning touchdown and is now posing for a photograph, his dad's proud, vicarious arm slung across his shoulders. Can I come in? No. As he sticks out his bottom lip and rounds his eyes into pathetic puppy dog orbs, Stephanie thinks there is something familiar about the arrangement of his features, the alignment of his pupils with the corners of his lips, the tilt of his nose, the curve of his eyes. A name flitters through the depths of her skull but won't float to the surface. I'm losing my mind, she decides, says, and shuts the door in his face. But when she turns, he is sitting on her living room couch, ankles crossed, arms folded behind his head, smirking. Again, Stephanie feels she should be afraid. She should call the police, try to throw him out. But she's never been one to fight the inevitable. If he got in once, she figures he can get in again. And I think I'll stop there, so I'm not doing too much reading. Thanks. Inspiration for this story, I don't know, a lot of things. So I think I started this story like way back in grad school. We're not going to say how many years ago. And I was taking a sci-fi fantasy course, and we were reading a collection of stories by an author named James Triptree. And there was a story that was kind of like a sci-fi version of Cupid and Psyche myth, of like there was a woman sort of Avatar style, like hooked up to this machinery that let her like sort of pilot another body. And that body was in a relationship with this guy, and it was like, okay, we're like dating, but you can never like see me sleeping, because when the body was sleeping, it was like inanimate, like there was no one piloting it. And so I thought it was really cool, sort of like melding mythology with sci-fi. Like I just thought that was really awesome, and I hadn't seen a lot of that before. So definitely there's a sort of Hades and Persephone thing going on in this story, with like the turning of the season, sort of like winter depression and like coming back out of it in the spring. And so there's that going on. There's also just sort of, I have a bit of a preoccupation with death as a character in general, like that appears many times in many of my stories. So this is another version of that. I also like sort of humor as an entry point into darker material. I like, this is a really heavy story about sort of grief and depression and suicide ideation, but also you've got almost like a wacky sort of death character, like bouncing around the apartment, like giving her ideas for how she can kill herself. So it's a bit dark, but I feel like the beginning of the story is quite funny and helps people sort of like ease into it before it sort of like hits you with the really heavy stuff. So there's all that going on. I don't know. Questions?
I'll ask a similar question of you. So you publish differently than Nick
Yes.
does. From writing to publication, what did that process look like for you?
Well, one of the audience members was asking me about this before we started, and it's a weird, I don't know if I can say how long it took to write this, because, so I have published like a lot of stories sort of just individually in magazines, like, or on websites, like here and there, and then only in the last couple years, like collected them and tried to get it published as my own collection. So, I mean, probably like a decade to write all the stories. And then I do have an independent publisher. So I did have someone that was sort of like made the cover art and like put the book together, and did a little bit of promotion for me. Like I had a blog tour, and helped edit. So I didn't have to do all of that on my own, but there's still quite a bit of like, trying to figure out social media and like promote things on Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, which is, I don't think there's a writer alive who actually enjoys doing any of that stuff. Because like we want to just like sit at home and like write at a desk by ourselves, and like being on social media is not what we want to be doing. But yeah, still having to do quite a bit of that too. But maybe a little bit of an easier lift with a publisher.
Now, this book came out not that long ago for you, but do you have inclinations of what's next?
I have had a few stories published since this came out, sort of individually in magazines and such. And I am hoping maybe like within the next year to have enough to collect in another short story collection, but that's kind of, out far on the horizon. I have really big news that I can't talk about yet for something that's coming out. Announcement coming soon, like later this week, but I'm not allowed to talk about it yet.
Fair enough.
Stay tuned.
I would say folks that are interested in that afterwards, I think everyone's going to be collecting emails for their newsletters. So you'll be able to be like the first to know, I think.
So did you have to pay for that? Would they pay you, or is this like something you do? How does it?
The publisher? Yeah, so I once I had collected everything into like the form that I wanted, I sort of like sent it out to various publishers that were saying they were looking for books. And then I did get paid a small advance from my publisher, and then I get royalties a couple times a year. So I did not have to pay them to publish it, but I'm not like rolling in dough off of my little indie book or anything. Yeah.
We're going to open it out at this time. Other Carla-specific questions?
Yes.
Is there like an order to the short stories? Is like, or are they all, out of order?
You'll parrot back his question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Is there an order to the short stories? I would say a lot of them are around the theme of, like people who are lonely, isolated, like dealing with grief. generally when you put together a short story collection, you kind of try to start with a strong story, end with a strong story, and the meh ones are kind of in the middle. So I did kind of try to do that when I was putting them in the order that they are. I mean, of course, not that I have any meh stories or anything. They're all fantastic. But yeah, trying to sort of start with a strong one and end with a strong one, and the others are in the middle.
You don't have a happy ending, but
Are there any? No, well, it's not a novel, so there's not really a ending for the whole book. But like, do any of these stories have? Well, yes. Yes, some of them have happy endings, depending on your definition of happy. Like the story I just read, I would say has a happy ending, actually. Believe it or not.
Is there any stories that you feel more connected to?
Are there stories I feel more connected to? I mean, I think kind of, as Nick was saying, a lot of the emotions that are behind characters, I think, are often some version of the author's emotions at some point or in some situation. So there's really no characters in here that are exactly like something that I went through. But like the idea of like grieving someone, which is sort of the inspiration behind this story, is certainly like something that I have been through. A lot of my characters in this book are sort of like, introverts and loners, and like, yeah, that's true. Like I connect with that. But some more than others. There's a story in here that was actually, a lot of my stories are inspired by like dreams and nightmares that I have. So there's one story in here that's sort of a woman has a newborn, and like the specter of death is sort of like haunting them, like waiting to take the newborn. And that was, a nightmare that I can think having children for, new fears introduced and things like that. So I connect with a lot of my characters, but in weird random ways, and not necessarily like because that exact thing happened to me, but more like I've experienced that emotion, or I guess.
Oh, I was wondering, you might have just answered one of my questions, was like where does the ideas come from? But I'm also wondering, because there's like 10 different stories, like you didn't write them chronologically, or like how did it happen that you ended up with that number? Like when did you write? How did that happen?
So it's a question about how did I put the stories together, or did I write them chronologically? I mean, the honest answer is, at some point I was just like, I think I have enough stories that have been published that I can put them together in my own collection, is the honest answer. I do think that they are thematically related because of my own issues, because most of the things I write are thematically related to each other. But no, I did not write them chronologically. I did not go in with like, here's the theme that I'm going to write all these stories about. This is more like many years of writing stories and then eventually putting some together that I thought went together. Yeah.
Any plans to write any long form fiction? Or is that the surprise?
Well, I couldn't say even if it were.
Okay.
But I will say, so the last story in this book is more what you would consider a novelette, which is something between like a short story and a novella. So it's like maybe 13,000 words. And I have since written a few things that are more like that length, which, by the way, is a terrible length if you are a writer and you're trying to publish things. Like, nobody wants to publish a novelette in a magazine. Nobody wants to publish a novelette on its own. So, it's great that I do that. So I've written some longer things. But as my book club people maybe know, like, I often feel like novels are too long. Like, I'm just like, why is there all this stuff in the middle that doesn't need to be here? Like, get to the point. So it's kind of hard for me. I mean, I do have a novel in progress, like every writer probably does. But it's kind of both. I just like have trouble like filling that middle part. And then it's also hard for me as a short story writer to hold all of that in my head. Like, for the length of a novel, the amount of stuff you'd have to keep track of is really daunting to me. So, kudos to my other authors that are up here who have written novels. But I find it kind of intimidating. But maybe someday. There's one on my, computer languishing. Yes.
What magazines do you make?
I have been in the Kenyon Review Online, Cosmorama, so many at this point. Some that don't really exist anymore. Like sometimes magazines kind of exist for a few years and then go away. Eucalyptus Lit was recently. there was like a fantasy magazine that doesn't exist anymore. There was sort of like one of my novellas was published somewhere called The Fantasist, which doesn't exist anymore. If you go to my website, you can see all my currently, like things that are currently available online to read for free or to buy. Yes.
I think we do have,
Oh.
There we go. Thank you. I was about ready to grab the microphone. That's okay.
Put my microphone on.
So I know you mentioned one specific author that influenced sort of that first story that you were reading from.
Yes.
Do you find that there are other
authors that you might draw inspiration from. Make the microphone take a while. I'm so sorry.
Would you say that there's other authors that you do draw inspiration from, or ones that you kind of turn back to, or things that authors or stories I should say?
It's definitely really hard picking like who is your influence for me, or like your favorite author, but I will say I'm very inspired by like Angela Carter, if you know her, or like Carmen Maria Machado, Nalo Hopkinson. So these are people, definitely like Angela Carter and Carmen Maria Machado, very like taking like sort of like fairy tales or like things like that and making them sort of, I don't know, dark, disturbing, horrific. Angela Carter, very like gothic kind of, I don't know, like Bluebeard retellings and stuff like that. Carmen Maria Machado, sort of like classic horror tales, but feminist horror. Nalo Hopkinson, again, actually a book I read when I was younger that was like amazing to me is Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson. Great book. Again, but kind of using like sci-fi fantasy to really deal with like trauma. Again, that has come up here, right? Like a really heavy, hard subject, but dealing with that in the realm of like fantasy or science fiction is just really, I don't know, inspiring me to me in what I'm trying, hoping to do. Yeah.
I'm gonna borrow that from
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so there again will be time at the end to ask more questions should you think of them. We're going to turn to Jennifer Safrey, is the author of the novel After Happily Ever, an epic novel of midlife rebellion, which is out now from Sibylline Press. Jennifer is a multi-published, award-winning author of romance and fantasy, including 4 novels for Harlequin, all featuring smart, sassy, and accomplished heroines and heroes you love to love. 2 of her romances won the Golden Leaf Award for Best Long Contemporary Romance. In addition to being a published author, Jennifer is a freelance editor and an adjunct professor at Emerson College, where she teaches a graduate course on romance novels. Fantastic. She is a Randolph resident and is a member of the Thayer Public Library Writers Group. Shout out to them. They meet this next Saturday. She's now married to her novelist boyfriend, Teddy, which happened 4 days before the publication of After Happily Ever. Please welcome Jennifer Safrey, author of Happily Ever.
Thank you so much. I am definitely on the fantasy end of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Okay, so right here is where things are a little bit lighter. But I am going to also read an excerpt tonight, and I did choose an excerpt that's like a little bit darker, and I think a little bit more in the theme of kind of what we're doing tonight. So at any rate, this book, After Happily Ever, an epic novel of midlife rebellion, this is the story of Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, and what happens when they're all about to turn 50. And so it's interesting that we've been talking about trauma a little bit with as sort of the things that the protagonists have been dealing with in Carla's books and in Nick's books. Because what I was thinking about when I started writing this novel is that these poor women really went through it as kids, didn't they? I mean, we read the fairy tales, right? And so it got me thinking about 35 years later how they as grown women would be dealing with these traumas that happened in their childhood that maybe they haven't really had to face, because when they rode off into the sunset with their Prince Charmings times 3, and by the way, in this story, the 3 princesses are sisters-in-law because they married the 3 charming prince brothers. And so they are related now, but once we kind of waved goodbye to them, we just kind of assumed everything's fine now. They're princesses and it's all good, right? Everything has forgotten. But I think as we as adults know that if you don't deal with things, they're going to come up over and over and over again in life until you deal with them. And so it made me wonder about these crazy traumas that these princesses had to deal with, right? So in this story, you have Cinderella, which of course her trauma as she was young was being pressed into domestic, servitude, and abused essentially by her stepfamily. And so, I imagined what she would grow up as, and she is a woman who is very wealthy and very happy to be very wealthy, with a very big clothing collection and a very big shoe collection. But her Prince isn't quite as charming as he is in name. And, she kind of has a lot to deal with in terms of trying to figure out what kind of legacy she's going to leave as her own sort of legendary beauty is fading with time, right? Like it does for all of us. And then we have Princess Bri, who is Briar Rose, Sleeping Beauty, essentially. And I figure that's a pretty big trauma, falling asleep for 100 years. And in the Grimm version of the fairy tale, she does fall asleep for 100 years, but not alone. She brings the whole castle with her. You guys might recall that. And the brambles grew up outside the castle, and everyone within the castle fell asleep for 100 years, and life went on, around them. And my thought was, upon awaking, is that these people were probably pissed at her, even though she really didn't know. Even in the fairy tale, she really didn't know what would happen. She wasn't avoiding a spindle. Nobody really told her. I think they were just hoping it would go away. And so the way I sort of envisioned it at the end was when Prince Charming came for her, they all said, well, don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out, bye. So she rode with him back to his kingdom. And so because of this, she turned into like a consummate people pleaser and somebody who doesn't want to be like shunned again or do the wrong thing again. She's desperately afraid of hurting people to the point where they will not like her anymore. And the final princess we have is Neve, Princess Neve, which is Snow White. And who I think has the worst trauma of all in that she died and came back to life. And she was dead for a good year before she came back to life in a coffin. And so as it happens, and I'm not giving anything away really here because it's in the first chapter, the king does die. And Neve is married to the eldest Charming, which makes her queen. And now she's more terrified than ever because being queen means that you have a target on your back, and she does not want to be assassinated again, right? She's somebody who sits with her back to the wall and is very vigilant and careful. So, she's now put in a position where she's not sure what to do. So I loved the idea of this kind of coming of middle age story for these women because, I know in my life, we kind of think of coming of age novels as children to adulthood, right? Like the child is 12 or the child is 15, and then something happens through the course of the book, and it kind of awakens them as somebody with more adult sensibilities. But the way I see it, I feel like I've had more than one coming of age moment in my life, and it wasn't just when I was 12, right? I feel like, I can think of one when I was in my 20s, and I could probably think of one in like my late 30s, and definitely in like my mid 40s, and I probably have a few to come. So I loved telling this story of these women who were able to make these very empowering decisions to kind of change their lives and face their fears so that they could be stronger people and perhaps become leaders rather than just figureheads, which is kind of what they are here in this kingdom. So I thought I would read you a little excerpt. I actually haven't read this excerpt in public at all. Usually I read from the beginning, but I wanted to do it because it felt like it was a little bit more in the theme. And I think all you need to know for this scene is that Neve, Snow White, is, things have been going on and she feels like she needs somebody to turn to, and she doesn't really have anyone to turn to for advice. So she calls on Della's fairy godmother, Rhiannon. And she asks Rhiannon to help her, and Rhiannon suggests a spell that might help her find whoever it is that she needs to talk to in order to kind of move forward with the events that are going on. I think that's all you need to know. And also the other thing you need to know is the kingdom they're in is Foreverness. And there's a forest at the edge of Foreverness, which used to be called the Everlasting Emerald Woods, and now it's called the Unfathomed, because Ever since a young girl went there and died, and they pulled her out and found out she was a princess, things have really started to happen in those woods, and they've really deteriorated to the point where nobody goes in there anymore. It's very mysterious, and Nev will never set foot in there again, because that's where the huntsman brought her to essentially kill her. And when she was married to the prince, she moved all of her uncles, right, the dwarves, out of there, and she will never go in there again, which I just think is significant, because in this sort of spell, she is compelled to have to go in there again, okay? All right. Yeah, reading with this microphone is not easy, okay. Very well, Nev said, let's get on with it. Just like that. It's midnight at the oratory, and I'm standing here with a fairy, Nev said. I'm confident I'm in the right place at the right time. Please sit, Rhiannon gestured to the grass. Nev sat and scooted until her back was against the tree. Rhiannon put her own hands on the tree and whispered a few words, then went silent. What are you doing? Nev asked. Rhiannon said nothing for another long moment, then she smiled up at the leaves. I'm asking the tree's permission to do magic here. But you say you come here often. I do, but I wouldn't thoughtlessly walk into a dear friend's home without knocking, no matter how many times I'd been there. Nev pulled her cloak more securely around her shoulders and chest. Close your eyes and try to hear me without listening, Rhiannon said quietly. Listen as if I'm singing you a lullaby. You don't need to follow my words, just float on the river of your unconscious. The fairy godmother began to chant in a foreign tongue that was impossible to understand, but somehow familiar. The syllables wound into Nev's ears and through her mind in swirls until she felt herself falling, landing hard on the earth, face down. She pressed her hands into the dirt and grass to lift her face. The oratory was gone, and she was surrounded by dark trees with gnarled branches. Long roots moved under the ground toward her to pull her closer, pull her in, pull her into the unfathomed. No, Nev said, and her voice came out in a mouse's squeak. No! The roots pushed up through the ground with earthy, hard tentacles that grabbed Nev by the thighs and elbows, wended around her chest, and branched across her throat. Nev lowered her chin and tried to look at the roots that held her fast. Her dress was different. It was the dress she'd gotten from her father on her 12th birthday. It was declared a feast day in Goldenstone, and she'd loved her gown so much that she'd worn it many times in the weeks after, including the day the huntsman had taken her into the unfathomed. Her curveless girl's chest heaved in fear, and her girl's arms were weak, and now that Nev knew she was back in her childhood body, she no longer felt her dagger. She was back where she'd been the day she'd had to run, defenseless. No, she screamed and struggled against the roots, but she heard Rhiannon's voice. It was ahead of her, and she moved toward it, afraid the roots would pull her back. But they moved with her, encouraging her. She was escorted deeper into the woods. She didn't know if it was day or night because the dark leaves formed a ceiling that blocked the sky. The birds didn't sing, they mourned and moaned. The few flowers dotting the grounds were black, with red blood dripping from the petals. Growls and whispers from invisible animals filled the air. Rhiannon's chant was loud now, and Nev stopped in front of a tree in her path. In front of the tree was a basket with a bottle of wine, a cake, and a bunch of pink and yellow flowers. The roots holding her captive dissolved. Nev bent down to pick up the basket, but a wet snarl stopped her, and teeth snapped out at her from above the basket. A wolf. Nev fell to the ground in her haste to back away, but now there was no wolf. Where had it gone? In its place, there was a young girl of perhaps 10 with shiny black hair and innocent blue eyes. Her dress was drab and her boots were ordinary, but her thick velvet hooded cape was the red of a carved heart. The two girls stared at one another, eyes wide, in shared terror of the unfathomed. A burst of sunlight filled Nev's chest, and she gasped as her birthday gown was replaced by a royal purple brocade. Her fingers were covered in rings. She felt the weight of a crown on her head and the assuring coolness of the dagger on her leg. The girl before her was no longer a girl. She had become a woman with long, wild black hair and sharp blue eyes. Her trousers were well worn. Her shirt was sleeveless, and her muscles were defined like a young man's. Her face was streaked with dirt. The full red cape was gone, with only a muddy scrap of it wrapped several times around her left wrist. Behind the woman, there was movement. The wolf slowly crept up, a wolf large enough to loom over her shoulder. No, Nev cried again, but this time, not for herself. The wolf drew back its lips into a menacing, hungry grimace, then relaxed its jaw and laid its head against the side of the woman's neck. She reached up and curled the wolf's neck with her arm, her fingers stroking its fur with love, her eyes never leaving Nev's. "Are you the one I'm looking for?" Nev asked in a disbelieving whisper. The wolf whined to its mistress like a helpless puppy. The woman gave no indication that she heard Nev's question and showed no inclination to verbally respond. She bent down and pulled the small cake out of the basket. She held it out to Nev. Crumbs fell out of her cupped hand. Rhiannon's voice echoed through the breeze. Nev reached for the cake. The invisible growling animals, the unharmonious birds, the dead black flowers, the twisted trees said into Nev's mind, "Rowan. Rowan." Nev closed her hand and the cake smushed through her fingers. Rowan, Rowan the wolf, Rowan the wolf. Nev lifted her chin. The woman was gone. The wolf grinned at her with knife teeth. Nev watched a long stream of drool slide out of its mouth, slowly, slowly. It splattered on the ground as Rhiannon said, "Come back, come back." Nev opened her eyes, shook her head, and rubbed her face with her open palms. Rhiannon's eyelashes shed a little more glitter. "Did you find the one?" she asked. "I don't think so." "You saw no one?" "Not anyone real." "That can't be," Rhiannon said. "That spell conjures real places, real people, with your own perception, of course, so things look the way you see them. If you saw someone, they exist." "I was in the unfathomed. I saw someone, but not someone who can help me. She isn't real. She's just a story that adults tell children to scare them." Rhiannon raised her brows. Nev answered her silent question. "Rowan the wolf." The fairy nodded slowly. "I see. Now that you've been given your guide, it's up to you whether you seek that person out." Rhiannon turned to leave. Nev scrambled up from where she'd been sprawled on the ground and, finding one of her feet numb, hopped to the fairy and caught her arm. "Wait, Rowan is just a story." "The spell told you Rowan the wolf is real, and she is in the unfathomed. It means whatever it is you need to hear, whatever it is you seek to move forward in your new role, she has it." "Maybe it was wrong." Rhiannon laughed, a tinkling and infuriatingly confident laugh. "That spell is never wrong." Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can probably guess what fairy tale figure that was. But yeah.
So we're gonna turn it over to the audience for Jennifer-specific questions. Anything you'd like to ask Jen?
I've stunned you all, I guess.
Do you have any stories about Belle from Beauty and the Beast?
I don't, but not yet. I'm definitely planning a few more. In fact, when I wrote this book, I wrote it in 3 points of view. I wrote it from Della, from Bry, and from Nev, and I had a 4th point of view originally, and I had to take it out because the book was way too long, and it was Rapunzel. So she'll come at some point, I think, and probably Belle.
Do you have a favorite Grimm's fairy tale?
Yes and no. I think my very, very favorite Grimm's fairy tale is real grim. I mean, it's The Robber Bridegroom, I think, which is real creepy. If anyone has a chance to read it, go read it. It's creepy. Like Carla's grinning because I feel like she probably knows it. It's creepy, but it's a good one. But, you know, I'll tell you, the interesting thing about the Grimm fairy tales, and in fact, Della's Cinderella story didn't come from Grimm. It came from the Charles Perrault version because that's the version we know. The Grimm version of Cinderella is actually really different and has a lot of different elements in it, like a bird and a tree and like a garden, and there's things going on there, but like, you know, the coach and the glass slippers and everything else is in the Perrault story, so that's what I went with so I wouldn't confuse anybody. But the interesting thing, now that you've asked me about the fairy tales, was that, and I'm no fairy tale scholar. Like I did what I research I could to write this book, but I'm not a mythologist or a scholar of these tales. But from what little I know, when you read Grimm fairy tales, the thing that I found that was missing was middle-aged women, because you see there's a lot of female protagonists, which props to Grimm because they did do that. Although a lot of the times it was like to teach the girl a lesson. So thanks. But usually when you have the female protagonist in a fairy tale, it's either like a young virgin girl, or it's a wise old crone, and which I fully intend to be. I'm just not there yet. And so, and what I was finding was like the women, I couldn't find a lot of middle-aged women anywhere. They were usually relegated to bit parts like a merchant or a washerwoman or something. And then even the evil like stepmothers and stuff, I still think they were probably pretty young, because these were young girls usually, so they were probably like in their 30s or something. So I felt like we were sort of missing in these stories. And so I wanted to sort of right that wrong a little bit. So not that it was a wrong, but I wanted to add to the canon, I guess, in the little way that I could.
Now that you're married, does that change your point of view of all these stories? Fairy tale princess?
That's an interesting question. And I did not get married until I was 54, which was this year. And I met my now husband when I was 48. So there were a lot of frogs before that.
And no children to scare.
Yes, I don't have kids, so I didn't have any children to scare. Yeah. Which, might have been fun. I definitely would have been given them a copy of The Robber Bridegroom like my mother gave to me in that book of Grimm's Tales. It's hard to scare them. They're graduate students. They scare me, I think, a little more than I could scare them. But I think, it is interesting, though, being married because, particularly being married to him because he is a writer also. And we have very different processes. And his process is, I'm going to write today, and he puts his head down and he writes all day. Like, can you imagine? Like, who does this? Right? Okay. I can't do that. Like, he'll be like, I have to write, and 6 hours later, he's still writing. I write for like an hour, and then an hour later, I'm like dancing with my cat, like washing the dishes. And Teddy's like, "The hell are you doing? Like, I thought you were supposed to write today." I was like, "I am." We're very, we're different. But yeah, I think I'm definitely a little more of a proponent of happily ever after than I was, and I do promise happy endings in this story for sure.
I just have a question as a middle-aged woman, as you said.
Yeah.
When you wrote the story, do you think what type of audience you expect to have? Because for us in our world, we're busy with life.
Yeah.
It's, then we already passed through the fairy tale stage.
Yes.
So what was your thought process that I'm going to write this so I can attract what type of audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, what kind of audience? Sorry, I was forgetting to repeat the questions. But the question was, what kind of audience was I looking to attract with this? And, I think, in the dedication, I did dedicate it to the women of Generation X, who is my, they are my generation. And so, I thought that it could kind of span generations a little bit, because these fairy tale princesses are familiar to women who are older than me and younger than me. And I think the idea of changing something in your life that you're not content with, or even a full direction that you're not content with, is a message that is important for all women, but I think particularly women my age, because I think many women, by the time they get to, around my age, aren't looking to make or think they can't make a major change if they're unhappy, because they've been in a certain position for a long time. And, I've made a lot of changes over the years. I made drastic career changes. I am divorced before I was married. So I've kind of, I went from being a journalist at the Boston Herald to owning a yoga studio to writing, books. And so I've done a lot of weird stuff, sort of like a bit of a reinvention person. And I like the idea of showing people that you can keep doing that at any age. So yeah, I mean, I think I kind of meant this for women my age, but I think younger women can appreciate it because they do. And I also think, why not ask younger women to read about older women? Because there's a lot of beautiful fairy tale retellings out there now. A lot of fantasy, a lot of romantasy. It's really big now. And but so much of it, if not almost all of it, is with a very young protagonist. And I don't have an issue with that in general, because I feel like it's really nice for younger people to have an interesting role model in fiction. But yeah, I don't want them to think that it ends at 30, that these women are like, look, I really wanted to have one of these princesses on the battlefield at age 50, and I did it, all right? So, because like on an actual battlefield, which felt like an allegory in a way. But, because we've battled a lot, and I wanted to write about these women who sort of earned the right to wear a crown. So, anyway.
It's like, it's a great concept. It's like it's the job interview. How do you imagine yourself in 5
Yes, because, let me tell you something.
to fairy tale people?
When I've only been to one of my class reunions, okay, and it was my 15 year, which is like nothing, okay. But the one class reunion I did go to, I remember walking into the restaurant, and I walked in by myself, and I was like a nerd. I was an unpopular, like nerdy weirdo. Like I wasn't a popular student. So I was like already intimidated walking into this room. So I walked into the room, I knew some friends of mine were gonna be there, but at first I looked around, and my first thought was, oh God, I don't know anybody here. And then my second thought was, oh my God, I know everybody here. But it took a second, And so it did interest me, that kind of idea of, what do these princesses look like at a 35-year reunion? Because they really had it made as far as we were concerned, So I just wanted to see what they were unhappy with and what they decided to change, and what, if they were in modern day, what they would have gone to therapy for, but they didn't have that back then.
It's like the football jock who's selling used cars.
Yes, exactly. So,
What does your husband write?
what does my husband write? He writes contemporary fiction. He's not published yet, but very shortly. So that will happen soon. I did beat him to the punch. But I beat him to the punch a long time ago, because my Harlequin books came out like 20 years ago. So he knew what he was getting with me.
Do you find yourself being around students changes your writing at all?
Do I find that being around students changes my writing at all? Yes, I definitely think so. I get to read a lot of very new fiction from people who haven't written any fiction before, or are very new at showing it to people, and giving and receiving feedback. And I always find that as a writer, whether they're students or whether they're other writers, I find that giving and receiving feedback, especially giving feedback, because if you can spot things that are happening in other people's work, you become much better at being able to see it in your own, because your own work is where you have all those blind spots. But yeah, I think seeing the students really excited about writing and trying to break genre conventions and have fun with stuff, it's very invigorating, I think. And I didn't think it would be, actually, but it is.
So, in the sake of keeping us on time and without running over too much, if
Sorry,
you
that
have
was me.
no, that's perfectly fine. I love this. If you guys have additional questions when we break off into signing, and folks are going to be up here, you can ask them then. But that being said, have one more question for the group. It's quite seasonally appropriate, I think. And these are just meant to be kind of what comes to mind. If you need a moment to think about it, that's okay though. If you had to investigate a haunted house, which 3 characters would you want to be stuck with you? They can be your own, another author's, doesn't have to be someone here. We're going to go from left to right.
I can only think of Scooby-Doo characters.
Okay. Okay, I have my 2 friends, Kaysen and Jess, because they are ghost hunters. They do that for, work. So I'm I know. I had my yoga studio, I swore it was haunted once, and I brought them in. I was really scared. And also Captain Olivia Benson from SVU. Law and Order SVU. Definitely. I feel like whatever happens, she's gonna hold it together. So.
I do have your microphone.
Okay, so I feel like I want someone who's not going to be scared. One of the people needs to be someone who is not scared of anything. So I think like a Wednesday Addams type, not going to be affected by anything. And then maybe like a Jean-Luc Picard kind of character who's going to like logic, reason things out. And then I feel like you just need like somebody wacky. And I'm not sure who that is, but you need like someone who's just wacky. Scooby-Doo character type, I guess. Okay.
And I have one more quick question. I forgot I had another one down here. If you could write in any genre that you haven't done so already, what would it be? I think we're going to go left to right.
I would love to try my hand at like a Western. I think that would be very interesting.
I think I would love to write a psychological thriller or a hilarious horror story. Like it would just have to be hilarious in order for me to get into it. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe like my husband for many years has challenged me to write like a story about a happy girl, and I haven't managed yet, so maybe I would try to do like just a realistic fiction story where people are happy and not traumatized.
Oh, the horror.
Yeah.
Well, all excellent answers. Thank you so much to everyone for being on tonight's panel. This is a fantastic discussion. We're going to take a second to reset this table up for signings. Feel free to help yourself to refreshments in the back, and we'll be back in like a second.